I previously had relationships with the Sigmas, but they never really worked out. Obviously, I haven't gotten any wiser because now I'm trying again. But after having used this for about a month, I'm pretty sure this adoration will last.
Kiss me as if it were the last time.
No. This is the new Sigma 135 f1.4 DG art lens that I got about a month ago. I wanted to make this video over a week ago, but I've had a bad cold, so it took a little longer. But now I have tested this lens in a recording studio, at a mountain bike race, at a music contest, and at a Magic Days event. So it has definitely been through its paces, and I can safely say that it is a fantastic lens, and I will be keeping it. Well, I guess that's it. You don't really have to watch the rest of this video. But if you want the details, feel free to stick around. A quick disclaimer, I bought the lens myself, and no one has paid or given me anything for this video. As usual, I've made chapters, so if you're interested in a certain part of my review, you can perhaps find it down here. Before we get to my practical experiences, let's go through the build and specifications of this one-of-a-kind lens. It is a 135mm f1.4 lens with autofocus that Sigma has created. You can find plenty of 135-1.8 lenses with autofocus, but a 1.4 with autofocus is a first. The lens has a front filter size of a whopping 105mm and a ginormous iris. I think they're talking about the iris. The lens has a manual focus ring and an iris ring to control the 13 aperture blades. It has an AF/MF switch, an iris lock switch, and the option to select whether you want clicks or not on the iris ring. It has no switch for the optical stabilization, because there is none. But with most modern cameras built-in stabilization, you'll hardly notice. And I haven't missed it. The lens has two HLA motors to move all the glass in there around. Without the front and rear cap, but with the lens hood and tripod mount, the Sigma 135mm weighs 1530 grams. It's quite a lot for such a compact lens, and it sure has some density. My Sony 50-150 f2, for example, is quite a lot larger, but only comes in at 1490 grams. It's not a big difference, but still about a chocolate bar lighter, and it's a zoom lens. I have owned the Sony 135mm f1.8 for a short period, a couple of years ago, but now my most used lens is the 50-150 f2, and for me it wouldn't make much sense to also have a 135 f1.8. But the Sigma 135-1.4 is 2/3 of a stop faster than the Sony 1.8 and a full stop faster than my 50-150. That could, for example, mean the difference between ISO 25600 and 12800. And even though many modern cameras do well at high ISO, there are still limits to the miracles. The closest focus distance is 110 centimeters, which might seem like a lot, but unless you're photographing stamps, it's not really an issue. Even close up in someone's face, you still need some distance to fit the entire face at 135mm, and I haven't had any issues focusing. The new lens hood construction is definitely an improvement. Now I don't have to mess about with a screw-up thing that I had, for example, on one of my previous Sigma telezoom lenses. Now it's just a button, and you don't have anything sticking out that could get in your way. The lens has a tripod collar with an Arca switch plate that also has a 1/4 inch threaded hole. You can take it off and replace it with a rubber ring, which also comes in the box. I've done that. I don't need the tripod mount, but it might come in useful for video, or perhaps if you want to use the lens on a star tracker for astrophotography. Well, enough talk about specifications. Let's get to the fun part, actually using the lens. About a month ago, the band Lujani started recording their second album in a studio in Copenhagen, and I asked if I could join them and document the process. Oddly enough, they're still not tired of me and accepted. So I was there for 3 days, and a large part of this review will be about the time I spent with Lujani in Copenhagen. I also spent some of the time in Copenhagen photographing with my Leica Q2 monochrome, but I'll make a separate video about that, and it will be released in 2 or 3 weeks. As usual, I didn't plan well ahead and decided to get the new Sigma 135mm lens just the day before going to Copenhagen, but then I couldn't order it online and get it in time. Luckily, the nice people at Boogies, a great camera shop that can be found in both Stockholm, Aarhus and also Copenhagen, could help me out. So I got on the train to Copenhagen and hurried to Boogies to pick up the lens. They kindly shipped the box with the lens color that I took off to my address, so I didn't have to carry it around with me. After that, it was just a very short ride on the metro to the Vibe Factory recording studio, where I met up with the band. Lujani had arrived the previous afternoon and had already set up their gear and started recording just before I arrived. Vibe Factory recording studio is owned by Jacob. I'd never met Jacob before, but besides being an accomplished producer, he also turned out to be a really nice person, and he kindly let me join the entire weekend. The studio was made up of a larger room, about 5 by 7 meters, and a smaller room of maybe 2 by 3 meters. Besides that, there was an area next to the studio with a pool table, a tennis table and sofas where we could relax and do something else. My plan was to make myself as invisible as possible, primarily to avoid interrupting the creative process, but also to get more authentic photos. The ups and downs, the acceleration and exhaustion, and the playful atmosphere that often can be found when hanging out with Lujani. I don't know much about making music, and I've never been to a recording studio before, but it was really interesting and fun to get insight into the process of recording an album. And please forgive me if my recount is somewhat flawed. It was an extensive setup for a layman like me. Firstly, everyone played, but Jacob and Carl August had to be in separate rooms so that the loud drums didn't interfere with the microphone recording vocals. Then they played a lot of the new numbers, but not all of them, again and again, until Jacob, the producer, was happy with just the recordings of the drums. That more or less took the entire first day, and then the rest of the weekend was primarily used on bass, guitar, keyboards and vocals. All the music was routed through a colossal mixing table because of the character it added to the sound, and then into a computer for further mixing and adjustments. Even when recording bass and guitar, instruments that probably could have been recorded directly into a computer, the sound went on a massive detour. Nikolai and Lucas played their music on a bass or guitar amplifier that was placed in the small room. Then that was recorded with a microphone going back to the large room, into the mammoth mixing table, and then onto the computer. Jacob, the producer, is very experienced and has worked with numerous renowned artists, so of course he knows how to get great sound, but I was just impressed by the entire setup. All the recordings was combined on separate tracks, and I got Jacob to play a bit of one of the new numbers, adding more tracks as we go along, just to give you an idea of how the music is constructed.
Er du klar?
Ja.
Okay. Skal vi gøre det forfra? Så,
Yes. I did bring both a 50-150 and a 16-35, and I used them a bit, but I had my mind set on using the 135 f1.4 as much as possible. And since there really wasn't a lot of light, it was perfect conditions for the new Sigma lens. I was there for 3 days, I was the one doing absolutely least. I had no specific tasks and no obligations, and I had all the time in the world. It was almost like a spa retreat without the spa part. I definitely wanted to get some nice photos to give to Lujani and Vibe Factory as well, and perhaps to my portfolio, but there was no rush. As the fly on the wall, I could keep my distance in the 2 recording rooms and get some amazing shots. The 135mm range and the 1.4 aperture just worked like a charm. I could keep my distance and still get countless shots of the recording and some of everything else. I also took the opportunity just to photograph Jacob outside when he was out for a bit of fresh air. And I filmed it so that you can get an idea of the distances. The first evening after recording, we couldn't really decide what to do, so we walked from the recording studio to the apartment where we were going to sleep. It turned into a bit of an odyssey involving a touch of alcohol. But I only brought my Leica Q2 monochrome on that excursion, so you'll have to wait a bit for that camera test. The second evening we were all pretty tired, and Lucas had even gotten a bit of a flu. So the rest of us went for a walk around parts of Copenhagen Harbour, just to get some fresh air and a bit of exercise. But I still brought the 135 and tested it out under those circumstances, just as I documented some of our other activities around Copenhagen. It was a fun weekend. My new Sigma 135mm 1.4 turned out to be a perfect choice for those conditions, and I'm glad I made the detour to the Göker camera store. About 3 weeks ago, I went to prison. Not for real though. They haven't caught on to me yet. But I went to Horsens to help out photographing a mountain bike and gravel bike race centered around the old prison in the city. The prison was active for more than 150 years, but closed almost 20 years ago and was converted into a hotel, a museum, and a cultural and event institution. I did actually spend a night in one of the cells, but they also did give me a key. I was focused on getting as many good photos as possible to the organizers, and there was plenty of light, so I primarily used my 50-150 f2. But I still took a bit of time to use the Sigma 135 f1.4 as well. I did these 3 photos, one at f1.4, one at f2 and one at f2.8. Of course you can see a difference in the background, but even at f2.8, it's still possible to get a nice separation. I also got this little sequence. The guy spots me, he raises his hands, and for me to get more or less everything in frame, I had to move backwards 3 to 4 meters quickly, which almost resulted in injuries, since the place was packed with hundreds of bikes. The Sigma 135 did produce some really nice photos, but honestly, using a zoom is much more flexible and practical. I also went to another event named Magic Days Odense. They used to call it the Harry Potter Festival, but J.K. Rowling obviously didn't like all the promotion, so they had to change it. My youngest daughter was going to the event in the city with her aunt, so I drove her there and took the opportunity to do a little comparison between the Sigma 135mm f1.4 and the Sony 50mm f1.2, which is a lens I'm also quite fond of. It didn't look like just the Harry Potter universe, but more like the fantasy genre in general. I'm not an expert on either, and no matter what, there was just a lot of really impressive costumes and makeup and infinite photo opportunities. I was there during daytime and there was plenty of light, so a fast zoom would probably have made more sense again, but this was about my new Sigma Prime. And look at this photo. I'm a couple of meters away from the subject and there's an ugly construction lift in the background, but it's blurred into obscurity. I also photographed this scary woman, first with the 135mm and then with the 50mm. I also got some close-up portraits with the 50. In some cases, having the 135mm will make you able to get better close-ups at a distance, and with the 50mm you actually need to get quite close. An 85mm lens could be a compromise though. I ordered one about a year ago, but before the shop was able to deliver, I cancelled because I already had the 50mm f1.2. I don't have much experience with the 85mm, but I am very fond of the look and the low light capabilities of my 50 f1.2. I'm not a bokeh aficionado and isn't focused on one bokeh look over the other. The fact is there's plenty of it on both lenses and magnificent separation. I prefer the look of the subject on the 135mm over the 50, but the 50mm is a bit more flexible, and if you can get close enough, you will also get amazing images. The same weekend as the Magic Days, Lujani participated in a song contest, and I spotted the opportunity to photograph both them and other bands and musicians as well. It took place at Storms, which is an old factory warehouse in Odense that has been converted into a food hall and culture and music venue. I packed light again and only brought the Sigma 135mm and the Sony 50mm, and I got a lot of nice photos with both lenses. The 135 worked really well at a distance, but some might criticize it for creating an almost too flat image. But closer to the stage I could get beautiful and tight shots, with the subjects being completely isolated from the background. The 50 worked very well closer to the stage and allowed me to get wider shots and include more, but it wasn't possible to get those really close-up shots. With the Sigma 135mm at f1.4, there is quite a lot of cat's eye bokeh in the corners, but if you step down to f1.8 or 2, there's really nothing left of that. That does of course defeat the entire purpose of getting a 135mm f1.4 instead of an f1.8. So if you're only getting this for the best possible Christmas light bokeh, there might be better options. But I haven't gotten it for a specific bokeh look, but for low light reach, where I'm still able to get a somewhat fast shutter speed. The talent of everyone playing at Storms was amazing. Lujani didn't win, but another skilled band named Tricep did. As I was packing up, I passed them whilst they were celebrating with their friends and fans, and I asked them for a photo. I had the 135 on my camera, and if I started digging around in my bag for the 50 and wasted time changing lenses, the band might shift focus. I had to stand perhaps 6-7 meters back in noisy and poorly lit surroundings, unable to communicate properly with the young lads. I did get a couple of nice photos, but it wasn't ideal and goes to show that the 135mm has its limitations. Last week it was Spil Dansk-ugen here in Denmark, which is an event organized by radio stations and music organizations to promote Danish music. Lujani played concerts both Friday and Saturday. Friday I had to act a bit parental for Halloween, but Saturday I went to their concert at Boogies in Odense. I did bring the Sigma 135mm f1.4, but the place was fairly well lit, and under those circumstances I do prefer to use my 50 to 150 f2. It's much more flexible, I can move around and adapt much quicker than with a prime. The Sony 50 to 150mm f2 will continue to be my preferred lens, but I'm glad the new Sigma 135mm is a part of my arsenal.
Ja, Boogies, sådan skal det være for fanden, mand.
That night I did have some weird dreams about greenish lycra and glittering red stars. I want to thank everyone participating in this video. Lujani has been back in the recording studio since my visit and still has some recording to do, but they expect their album to be released in March 2026. I might get the chance to also photograph their second release party and will definitely bring my Sigma 135mm f1.4 DG Art. With this, I won't get the same fast frame rates as with my native Sony lenses, but it's not bought for neither bokeh nor fast frame rates, but for low light reach. It's not ideal for run and gun photography or full figure photos, unless you have the space, but for beautiful close-ups, it's amazing. Some might find the images too flattened and prefer an 85 or a 50, but I like it. I've already put this chunky piece of glass through its paces and it has performed very well. It's definitely a lens I can recommend. Probably not as your first lens, perhaps a zoom of some sorts, and maybe not even as your first prime lens, perhaps something a bit wider, but definitely a lens you can use to produce beautiful and unique photos with. It's getting dark now here on the northern part of our planet, and I'll get ample opportunities to bring this to use both indoors and outdoors. Perhaps I can make one of those 6 or 12 month later long-term reviews. I've not tried that yet. I hope you found this review useful. Please consider hitting the like button and perhaps subscribe as well. As usual, I have saved a few of my top picks for you, taking with this, the Sigma 135mm f1.4 DG Art till the very end. See you around.
I think I'm gonna break down. I've been